Princess Anne moved with deliberate purpose through the secure corridors of the royal household. 5 minutes earlier, a decision had been made deep within the walls that shattered the long-maintained silence surrounding one of Princess Diana's most emotionally resonant possessions. With authority granted directly by King Charles, she reclaimed the sapphire ring before it could pass into Camilla's access-controlled collection. The request was denied without hesitation. The vault door closed once more, leaving the ring in Anne's care, and an old wound within the family reopened with quiet force. This was no mere matter of jewelry. It touched upon memory, loyalty, and the enduring fractures that time had never fully healed among those who bear the weight of monarchy. Anne did not pause as the security mechanisms opened before her. She carried a signed custodial order, a formal instrument naming the rightful protector of this disputed item, and those present understood it bore the king's direct endorsement. For years, the sapphire ring had rested apart from Diana's other effects in careful storage, because no one wished to confront whether it belonged to history, the crown, or her immediate family. That uncertainty had preserved it, but also created the opening Camilla believed she could finally exploit. The vault custodian read the document's final clause twice, then informed the Queen Consort's representative that only Anne could receive the sealed case. The atmosphere shifted palpably. Camilla's envoy lowered her gaze while Anne stood composed, burdened not triumphant by the gravity of what this act represented for the living and the legacy they guarded. When the case was placed before her, Princess Anne did not reach for it immediately. She regarded the sapphire with a steady gaze that carried the weight of years spent observing the intricate and often painful realities of royal life. The stone caught the light with a quiet intensity, reminding her not of public spectacles or tabloid headlines, but of Diana as a woman whose absence continued to echo through the private corridors of the family. Anne remembered the isolation Diana had borne with remarkable courage, the strain that lay behind every public appearance, and the dignity expected from someone who received far too little genuine protection in return. These were the reflections of a mature mind shaped by decades of duty and a deep understanding that behind the grandeur of monarchy lay very human struggles with loneliness, expectation, and the enduring consequences of choices made under immense pressure. In that moment, Anne saw the ring not merely as an object of value, but as a tangible link to a chapter of family history that demanded careful guardianship if it was to honor the truth rather than serve convenience. Camilla received the news at Clarence House, the London residence she shared with King Charles. She had anticipated some measure of delay or formal resistance, but the direct and personal nature of the rejection, backed by her husband's own signature, struck deeper than expected. The ring had already left the vault, and with it any immediate influence she might have hoped to exercise over its future. The humiliation settled heavily because Charles had chosen his sister's custody over granting her access. No advisor could offer a satisfactory explanation whether the king's decision stemmed from lingering guilt, personal conviction, mounting family pressure, or a measured concern about the intentions behind the request. Charles himself remained silent in the aftermath of signing. He understood that this single order accomplished far more than relocating a jewel. It established a deliberate boundary between the current reigning household and the powerful, persistent memory of the woman the monarchy had at times failed to protect with the care her position and humanity deserved. Anne closed the case with measured care, her fingers lingering for a brief moment on the cool surface as if sealing not just a physical object, but a chapter of shared family history that demanded reverence. She placed it inside the secure document pouch with the quiet efficiency of someone long accustomed to handling matters of consequence far from public view. To the custodian she spoke firmly yet without unnecessary drama, stating that the ring's next destination must remain undisclosed for the time being, shielding it from further speculation or interference. In that departure from the vault, Anne carried more than a jewel. She bore the responsibility of a decision that touched upon loyalty, memory, and the delicate balance of power within a family defined by both blood and institution. The true significance of her actions would unfold gradually, revealing itself through the private stakes surrounding Diana's ring and the three central figures now positioned across a quiet but profound divide. To the outside world, the sapphire remained an item of beauty and historical note. Within these walls, it represented unresolved tensions, promises kept across time, and the heavy inheritance of history that resisted simple resolution or convenient forgetting. Anne walked away with the steady composure of a woman who had weighed competing claims and chosen the path she believed preserved dignity above expediency. For Princess Anne, the sapphire represented far more than a precious gem set set in diamonds. It embodied a solemn personal commitment to defend the dignity and memory of a woman who could no longer speak on her own behalf or influence how future generations would understand her place in royal history. Her own relationship with Diana had been nuanced and at times strained by the realities of royal duty, yet beneath those surface tensions lay a quiet recognition and genuine sympathy for the immense pressures any woman faced when confined within the monarchy's unforgiving expectations. Opening the secured case alone in a moment of private reflection, Anne allowed the Sapphire's deep blue hues to hold her attention. She did not revisit old public scandals or sensational narratives. Instead, her mind turned to the profound isolation Diana had carried with such outward courage, the emotional strain concealed behind every poised smile, and those private moments when dignity was relentlessly demanded from someone granted comparatively little genuine support or protection in return. These were the contemplations of a woman whose maturity had been forged through decades of unwavering service, keen observation of human nature under pressure, and an appreciation for the subtle ways in which institutions could both elevate and isolate those who served them. In safeguarding this particular symbol, Anne saw an act of quiet justice, an acknowledgement that certain legacies required active defense if they were to remain true to the woman who had worn the ring rather than being reshaped to fit more convenient or contemporary institutional stories. King Charles understood with intimate and often painful clarity why this ring could never be dismissed as ordinary property or a simple piece of royal regalia. It remained deeply intertwined with the most difficult chapter of his personal life, with the lasting grief still borne by his sons William and Harry, and with the monarchy's collective unease about fully confronting the ways it had failed to adequately protect Diana during times of greatest need. The royal collection system, with its rigorous protocols for preservation, cataloging, and public or private display, conferred upon whichever household managed it considerable authority over narrative framing and long-term disposition. This structural reality was precisely what rendered Camilla's request so potentially consequential and fraught. Later, sitting alone with the inventory documents spread before her, Camilla experienced an initial surge of anger that gradually gave way to a deeper, more introspective apprehension. She feared that despite her elevated position, she might never be fully permitted to help define or influence Diana's enduring place within the official historical record of the monarchy. Her request had not been a casual desire merely to view the jewel. It had sought formal transfer into a collection administered directly by her own household, thereby granting her advisors meaningful influence over matters of display, descriptive language, interpretive context, and eventual future handling. Anne perceived the inherent dangers with the sharp insight developed over a lifetime spent navigating the intricate protocols and hidden power structures of royal life. Once the Sapphire entered that specific custodial pathway, any requirement to consult William and Harry could easily become discretionary rather than mandatory, a development she regarded as crossing an inviolable line that no royal title or current position could legitimately justify. She closed the case with slow deliberation, feeling a profound sadness crystallize into firm, unyielding resolve. Charles paused outside the room before entering, carefully selecting his words because he recognized that this conflict went far beyond questions of ownership. It concerned whether he had at last provided meaningful protection when it mattered most, and whether his signature on the order might atone, even partially, for the damage wrought by earlier periods of institutional and personal silence. Anne met his gaze steadily, without softening her expression. She already understood that the confrontation they faced traced its origins to a hidden dispute months earlier, one that had simmered beneath routine ceremonies and administrative processes rather than beginning in the vault or with any formal document. The implications stretched beyond this single jewel into questions of how memory itself would be managed, preserved, or potentially reshaped for public consumption and private understanding alike. That underlying tension had first become evident during what outwardly appeared to be a standard private ceremony focused on the restoration of several historic jewels. The gathering had seemed routine and unremarkable until Camilla paused deliberately beside the display featuring Diana's sapphire ring and quietly proposed a change to its official classification. Anne had registered every word with careful attention. Charles had chosen silence in that moment, and in that restrained exchange the conflict that would eventually fracture the household crossed a point of no easy return. Camilla had stood alongside the senior collection registrar while other royals reviewed items items being painstakingly restored, catalogued, and reassigned across different branches of the family. The private Windsor Castle event was intended primarily to address practical administrative matters, yet every label and classification carried subtle but significant implications for authority and control. Diana's ring was formally listed as a protected personal legacy item, which meant it could not be transferred, publicly reinterpreted, or incorporated into ceremonial use without explicit approval from her direct family. This protective designation existed for compelling reasons, because even a minor alteration in classification could dramatically shift the balance of who ultimately controlled the object's story, presentation, and long-term significance. What began as an apparently minor suggestion revealed deeper currents of intent regarding how the past would be framed in relation to the present reign. The decisive confrontation unfolded in complete privacy, deliberately stripped of advisors, courtiers, or any legal intermediaries who might dilute the raw honesty required. Anne had orchestrated the meeting with clear intention, entering the small, intimate sitting room where Camilla waited with composed but evident tension. She closed the door herself with a quiet finality that signaled no escape from the conversation ahead, then placed the unsigned custodial order directly on the table between them like a challenge that could no longer be postponed. There would be no elegant palace phrasing to obscure uncomfortable truths, no secretary present to soften delivery or provide diplomatic cover. Only two women who had long navigated the complexities of royal life now faced each other, the sapphire ring resting silently as witness, and the central, haunting question that had lingered unresolved for decades: who truly held legitimate moral and practical authority over Diana's memory, her legacy, and the symbols that carried her story into the future? Camilla had arrived expecting a measured procedural discussion governed by protocol. Instead, she encountered Anne's unfiltered resolve and the absence of any buffer that might allow later reinterpretation of what was said. The custodial order, a formal legal instrument designed to determine who could control and protect disputed royal possessions, lay unsigned and prominent on the table, its language clear and uncompromising. Anne held her position with conviction rooted in years of observation, stating that Diana's legacy belonged first and foremost to her children and, in time, to their descendants. To place the ring under the administrative authority of the reigning consort's household would represent, in her deeply considered view, not prudent administration, but a profound and unacceptable surrender of boundaries that had been carefully maintained through quiet vigilance and respect for personal history. Camilla's response carried the full accumulated weight of years spent proving her place, as she accused Anne of treating her permanently as an intruder within the family circle despite her marriage and years of dedicated service. She spoke candidly and with visible strain of the decades at Charles's side, years filled with unrelenting public scrutiny, the heavy demands of duty, and periods of intense personal and public hostility, yet still discovering that she was often measured against the powerful, enduring image of a woman no longer alive. Beneath the evident anger and frustration lay genuine pain and a deep exhaustion born from repeatedly entering rooms and situations where Diana's memory seemed granted greater legitimacy and emotional resonance than her own living presence and contributions. Anne listened with attentive seriousness, refusing to retreat from her stance or offer superficial comfort. She clarified that the dispute concerned neither Camilla's marriage, her title, nor her documented record of dedicated service to the monarchy. Rather, it touched upon the profound and lasting implications of placing Diana's ring under a household Diana had never been part of, thereby allowing that household to shape and define what the sapphire would signify, not only in the present, but for future generations who would inherit both the jewel and the narratives surrounding it. The princess offered a measured but firm warning that authority over memory and historical narrative could inflict deeper and more enduring wounds than the physical possession of any object ever could. Camilla pushed her chair back slightly, her voice rising as she demanded to know whether Anne truly believed she intended to wear the ring herself. The answer came back steady, immediate, and unflinching. Control could wound profoundly even if the object never touched a hand. That statement shattered the final layers of restraint, exposing raw emotions, differing life experiences, and the ways in which personal histories and institutional roles had become inextricably entangled over many years. Charles had signed countless official documents beneath the royal cipher throughout his long reign. Yet this particular paper Anne placed before him carried an entirely different and far heavier emotional and moral weight than any he had encountered before. It did not concern routine matters of policy, appointments, or ceremonial obligations that formed the daily machinery of monarchy. Instead, it compelled him to directly confront and revisit a deeply personal and institutional failure that no amount of crown authority, public ceremony, or passage of time could ever fully erase or absolve. On one side of the decision stood his wife Camilla, seeking trust, acceptance, and fuller integration with the monarchy's complete inheritance and future direction. On the other stood the powerful, persistent memory of Diana, the continuing and profound grief carried daily by his sons William and Harry, and Anne's steadfast, unyielding refusal to permit institutional silence or bureaucratic convenience to determine the ring's fate once more. Reading the custodial order alone in the quiet sanctuary of his study, he noted its clear and unambiguous provisions granting the sovereign ultimate authority to appoint an independent guardian and effectively block other households from gaining control over the item. When he reached the specific clause naming Anne as custodian, he paused for a long, reflective moment, allowing the full implications to settle deeply within him. Seeing Diana's name repeated throughout the supporting records brought a fresh and poignant wave of recollection and regret. He remembered with vivid and sometimes painful clarity the high human and emotional cost of past silence, when palace systems and well-meaning advisors had allowed difficult responsibilities to be diffused in ways that ultimately required direct personal courage, accountability, and intervention instead. The decision before him felt like a long-delayed personal reckoning with choices made years earlier and their persistent, living consequences in the lives of those he held dearest. The king's signature brought an immediate and decisive end to Camilla's direct claim upon the ring, yet it simultaneously triggered broader and more far-reaching consequences that rippled outward throughout the royal household and beyond. Her advisors had already prepared additional formal requests involving other significant pieces from Diana's personal collection, plans that now hung in uncertainty or outright jeopardy. Anne accepted the signed document with quiet dignity and composure, showing no outward sense of personal triumph or satisfaction in the outcome. Charles watched her depart from the room with a heavy heart, fully aware that while he had succeeded in protecting one important object of legacy, he had simultaneously introduced fresh and painful strain upon his marriage, his relationship with his sons, and the monarchy's long-suppressed emotional wounds that had never fully healed. By the time Anne reached the vault and secured the ring under the order's protection, the document stood as legally binding and final. At Clarence House, Camilla confronted the expanding and sobering reality that the rejection reached well beyond this single sapphire. A subsequent document soon arrived confirming that all pending requests from the Queen's household concerning Diana's private jewels were now suspended until a comprehensive new family review could be thoroughly completed. Camilla's heritage-related projects and initiatives came to an abrupt and humbling halt. Collections staff moved quickly to seal related inventories and cancel scheduled reviews. She sat absorbing the formal distinction now being drawn between constitutional authority and deeply personal emotional legacy, a separation that meaningfully narrowed her influence in this sphere and forced a difficult, introspective reassessment of assumptions she had long held about integration, continuity, and her place within the family's historical narrative. Mature and thoughtful reflection upon the entire sequence of events revealed how profoundly legacies remained intertwined with the complex realities of living relationships and the unrelenting demands of institutional life under constant public observation. True duty, in its deepest sense, required a careful, ongoing, and often painful balance between deep reverence for the past and compassionate understanding for those shouldering present responsibilities under intense scrutiny. The Sapphire had compelled the family to examine uncomfortable but necessary questions surrounding guilt, protection, the true nature of continuity, the limits of institutional memory in the face of personal pain, and the human cost of unresolved history that lingered across generations. Charles carried the particular burden of decisions whose effects would continue rippling across generations in ways both visible and deeply private. Anne's discipline, clarity of purpose, and willingness to act provided a source of resolve when others might have preferred hesitation, compromise, or deferral to avoid immediate discomfort. Camilla faced the inherent limits of her position when confronting memories and symbols that transcended any single title, era, or individual effort, no matter how dedicated. These family dynamics illustrated timeless challenges faced by those bound together by both blood and the unique pressures of monarchy, where personal pain, public role, historical responsibility, and the deep human need for healing healing remained inseparably connected. Such situations called for wisdom, emotional restraint, courage to confront difficult truths without flinching, and the maturity to accept that some resolutions would remain imperfect yet necessary for the greater preservation of dignity, continuity, and the possibility of future reconciliation. Anne deliberately arranged a private meeting with William at Windsor, intentionally seeking a setting removed from the usual institutional buffers, formalities, and layers of protocol that often shaped and constrained royal discussions. No aides were invited to attend. No official minutes were recorded or required. Between them rested the sealed case that Anne had carried from the vault, untouched since the moment of its removal under the order's authority. William recognized the inventory markings immediately upon seeing it. For several long, contemplative moments, neither spoke, allowing the silence to convey depths of feeling and understanding that words might struggle to capture adequately. While the public dimensions of the struggle had been intense and widely observed from afar, this quiet, intimate exchange between son and aunt marked the true turning point in the ring's journey toward resolution. Anne proposed establishing a dedicated family trust specifically designed to secure the ring for Diana's descendants across future generations. She had selected the location with great care to emphasize personal trust, familial bond, and thoughtful stewardship over any transactional or bureaucratic process. William understood instinctively why such an arrangement carried deep and lasting importance for him personally. To him, his mother's jewels were never merely symbols of prestige, status, or historical curiosity. They embodied layers of grief, cherished personal memory, and the solemn responsibility to preserve what the next generation would one day inherit with care, respect, and integrity. The conversation that followed reflected years of lived experience, shared loss, and a mutual commitment to thoughtful, enduring stewardship of what mattered most in the face of time's passage. Anne gently slid the case toward him across the table, keeping one hand resting lightly upon it as she explained with quiet clarity that while successfully removing the immediate threat had been both necessary and important, it addressed only part of the larger, more enduring challenge facing the family. A permanent, thoughtfully constructed framework was essential to prevent similar painful disputes from arising again in years to come under changing circumstances or shifting priorities. William watched attentively as the case was opened, but did not reach for the sapphire right away. Instead, the prince lowered his gaze, becoming lost for a time in private memories of how every public symbol connected to his mother still carried significant private emotional weight for both him and his brother Harry. With the measured depth and wisdom of individuals who had lived through profound personal loss and come to understand the lasting value of careful, enduring stewardship over time. They discussed various possibilities at length, seeking approaches that would honor Diana's memory authentically and fully, while allowing the wider family to move forward without either erasing difficult chapters from the record or imposing artificial forms of unity that might prove fragile under future pressures or shifting generational perspectives. The exchange carried the gravity of maturity earned through hardship, reflection, and a shared desire to protect what remained precious. This particular episode shed important and revealing light on some of the deeper, inherent tensions that have long existed within the monarchy, especially the ongoing and delicate work of reconciling intensely personal legacies with the broader requirements of institutional continuity and public perception. Mature observers recognized that wounds inflicted by history seldom healed quickly or neatly, and instead required sustained, thoughtful attention and care over extended periods of time. Decisions concerning significant objects such as this ring inevitably reflected larger and more profound questions about respect for the past, the genuine possibility of healing, and the institution's capacity to adapt meaningfully while remaining true to its foundational principles and history. The family's handling of the matter, though imperfect and emotionally costly for all involved, demonstrated a serious commitment to establishing clear boundaries and engaging in a deliberate, considered process rather than allowing matters to drift unresolved. In an era of relentless public examination, commentary, and scrutiny, such internal resolutions held significance not only for those directly involved, but for the monarchy's broader ability to honor its complex and multifaceted past while addressing the demands and realities of the present with dignity, realism, and a measure of hard-won wisdom. The outcome served as a quiet reminder that thoughtful guardianship of symbols could ultimately strengthen rather than weaken the institution over generations, fostering resilience in the face of change. Camilla processed the outcome with a careful carefully maintained, composed exterior that concealed the considerable depth of her private reflection and emotional adjustment in the days and weeks that followed. Years of dedicated service and unwavering duty had brought her considerable position, influence, and responsibility, yet they had not succeeded in eliminating certain fundamental separations within the family's emotional and historical landscape. In her quietest moments of solitude, she confronted the reality that some elements of royal history remained distinctly preserved and resistant to full integration or contemporary reinterpretation, no matter how diligently one worked. This private reckoning gradually yielded a complex mixture of acceptance, lingering personal pain, quiet sorrow, and a renewed determination to fulfill her role with meaning and purpose within the boundaries that had now been clearly and formally established. The monarchy had always demanded such maturity and inner resilience from those who served it, requiring them to reconcile individual aspirations, experiences, and disappointments with larger institutional truths that often transcended any single lifetime or personal journey. Camilla's internal process reflected the universal human challenge of finding authentic purpose and dignity while living in the long, formidable shadow cast by legendary predecessors, balancing personal integrity with public obligation in the presence of an enduring and powerful public memory that refused to fade easily. In the quiet solitude of his own thoughts, away from the demands of schedule and ceremony, Charles contemplated at length the signature he had placed on the order and the widening ripples of consequence it had created throughout the family and institution. While he had succeeded in safeguarding one important legacy that mattered deeply to him and his sons, the decision had undeniably introduced new strains and complications upon another central relationship. He weighed carefully the inherent limits of attempting atonement or resolution through formal action alone and the persistent, intricate nature of human relationships when lived under the constant pressure of public scrutiny and high expectation. Long experience had taught him that perfect balances were rarely achievable in such matters, yet the sincere effort toward clarity, fairness, and protection remained an essential and inescapable part of leadership. Past periods of institutional and personal silence had proven deeply costly in human and emotional terms. The more recent intervention, while necessary and justified in his view, brought its own fresh challenges and unforeseen emotional consequences for those closest to him. In these solitary reflections, the king considered the heavy burdens that accompanied leadership, the enduring power of memory that spanned generations, and the quiet, persistent hope that such deliberate choices might contribute, however imperfectly or gradually, to eventual healing within the family and the institution he had devoted his entire life to serving. Regret mingled with a sense of necessary, if painful, action, reflecting the mature acknowledgement that some decisions carried unavoidable costs along with their intended benefits and protections. Ultimately, the Sapphire found itself placed in hands committed to honoring Diana's memory with sincerity, integrity, and a deep sense of lasting respect for the woman behind the symbol. The family's navigation of this complex and emotionally charged chapter illustrated that genuine duty encompassed both the careful preservation of the past and the compassionate extension of understanding toward the living individuals who continued to carry its weight in their daily lives and responsibilities. For those who had witnessed and actively participated in decades of change, transformation, and occasional crisis within the monarchy, the resolution offered a measure of quiet reassurance that certain wounds could indeed be tended with wisdom, patience, and care, allowing important legacies to endure meaningfully alongside the ongoing lives and responsibilities of those who inherited them. The broader narrative of the monarchy moved forward, shaped in subtle but meaningful ways by such considered and thoughtful acts that sought, in their own imperfect human fashion, to reconcile the often painful complexities of history with the enduring human needs for understanding, clear boundary, justice, and genuine continuity. In this manner, one seemingly singular ring became emblematic of larger, ongoing efforts to carry forward what truly mattered with the depth of perspective, compassion, and hard-earned wisdom that only time, lived experience, and reflective maturity could provide, ensuring that memory served not merely as a source of division, but as a foundation for thoughtful progress and healing in the years ahead.